Hello, I'm Matthew from the King's Fund. Thank you to Barbara and koha-US for giving me the opportunity to present to you today, and for allowing me to do it remotely. All being well, I'm currently at home in the UK, in Walthamstow, North East London, home in the 19th century to William Morris and the art and craft movement. And I'm particularly pleased to be able to talk about Koha in the context of open source. For many libraries I've spoken to over the years, the main reason they chose Koha was the cost. But for us, moving to Koha was the central and defining part of an overall and ongoing commitment to open source. My intention now is to sum up our experience of that over the last 15 years. The King's Fund is an independent health charity based in central London, this year celebrating its 125th anniversary. It focuses on health and social care policy, seeking to improve healthcare for all by influencing decision makers. The library has been in operation since 1948 and operates under a public library licence, providing a support service to its staff, and is open, reference only to the public, as well as providing a free remote inquiry service. We hold around 140,000 bibliographic records, many of which are abstracts of journal articles. The collection features our own King's Fund publications, dating back to 1898, and an extensive collection of grey literature. Our open source story goes back to about 2007, when fundamental changes were set in motion for the library. Traditionally focused on physical visitors, with all items immediately accessible, we were to be physically moved into a smaller area, holding only about a third of existing stock, asked to dramatically increase our online presence, and to generate significantly more income. These changes would fundamentally change the nature of the library and ways of working, and we were asked to be innovative in finding solutions, although no significant money was available for that innovation. I feel libraries are a natural home for open source. Concepts of freedom and learning, a willingness to share information and experience are common to both, and the situation we found ourselves in provided an ideal environment for us to try out open source to bring efficiencies, modernise processes and increase our reach. Firstly, we implemented a wiki and a message board on a local machine to try out internal communications, and started to write our own code with simple things like an online visitor counter to replace the traditional 5-bar gate, and repackaged bibliographic records into the newly emerging RSS format for our external audience. These early explorations were successful, so an external Linux server space was arranged as a more robust home for our downloaded open source software and original code, and the LAMP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP standard was adopted for selection and development. PHP was what I had most experience in. The success of our preparation for the library move in 2008, wherein we combined a stock check, a weeding process, a relabeling, security and RFID tagging of each item, as well as separation of sorted stock ready for new various destinations, saw a wonderful rumpus of books, trolleys, labels and librarians working with smooth efficiency, underpinned by scripts and spreadsheets, and relying heavily on technology, was a key factor in gaining confidence for a new and modern approach and some of the bigger ideas we'd been working on. The fundamental part of these bigger plans from our perspective was to develop a database for our inquiry service, to replace the existing paper-based system. Doing so would create many efficiencies, allow the reuse of information in a knowledge base, and allow access to instant statistics. So I started to build a system with a web forms interface for the front end, a MySQL database for storing inquiry details, and a hook into a local wiki to store the answers. Meanwhile, in terms of our library management system, the King's Fund was the first European customer for Circe's Unicorn in 1989, but by 2008 we felt neither engaged with the company, which by then merged with Dynex, or the current workflow system, which was stuttering toward its end of life, and weren't enamoured by the option of moving to the new Symphony system, which we felt didn't match our newly expanded ambitions. We became aware of Koha, and with our increasing confidence in installing open source software locally, purely out of curiosity I downloaded it and installed it. The installation was far from straightforward in those days and brought us a genuine sense of satisfaction in achieving it, but more than anything a sense of wonder that a functioning library system, which at the time we had conceptions of costing tens of thousands of pounds, taking up most of the machine room in hardware, and requiring hundreds of pages of a procurement document simply to describe, was contained and running on my little laptop. But thoughts of moving to koha for our live system at that stage were fanciful. The UK was generally not an advanced adopter of open source. The King's Fund was a Microsoft house, as our head of IT described it, and his team was sceptical at best about open source. There was no precedent in the UK of a library moving from an established library system supplier to an open source alternative. And fear, uncertainty and doubt was actively spread by proprietary companies. Those were the days of Steve Ballmer as CEO at Microsoft and his anti-open source rhetoric, and it was the time of Stephen Abrams' infamous caveat emptor letter. But we met with PTFS Europe in September 2009. 3 of their then 4 staff came along, Jonathan, Nick and Ian, and everything seemed to make so much sense for us that, in short, we went live with Koha, hosted and supported by PTFS Europe at the end of 2009. Our IT department's mistrust of open source was negated by the trust of PTFS Europe staff, who they'd known since the early days with Cersei, and their detailed knowledge of our existing system. In the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008, our senior management team and finance department were easily swayed by the immediate cost savings presented, and we overcame our own concerns at the lack of precedent by having faith in our judgment and the success we had achieved thus far in innovation, and by our conviction in the benefits and freedoms provided by the open source model. And just to break from the narrative, now that I've given some context, my very anglicised pronunciation of Koha was consciously adopted in those early days when we were trying to convince senior colleagues that moving to an open source system that no one else in the country had adopted at that stage was a logical and sensible thing to do, and didn't want the distraction of efforts at an authentic pronunciation. And my insistence on referring to PTFS Europe, not just PTFS, is, without going into the history, because they're very different companies, and it's PTFS Europe who have supported and hosted Koha for us all these years, and provided increasing development, resource and support to the Koha community. Anyway, back to 2009, and amidst the physical upheaval of a move into a much smaller library space, with most of our stock going into storage, team members permanently dispersed around the building, and our working practices, aims and services being redesigned, we worked on our migration to Koha. And fittingly, as the years-old monopoly of the UK Christmas #1 hit single by the X Factor franchise was broken by Rage Against the Machine, we went live with Koha. In a time of great upheaval, when the library was seeking to find its new identity, Koha and open source became galvanising and unifying factors, symbolising our resilience. Emboldened by our commitment to Koha, we decided to go live with the internally developed inquiry database at around the same time. It was immediately successful, and, as with Trigger's broom from Only Fools and Horses or the Ship of Theseus paradox, despite several styling and structural changes and a complete code rewrite at one stage, the same inquiry database continues to run, amendments and additions being made whenever need arises. This development obviously meant staff were no longer tied to a physical inquiry desk, and our early trial of remote inquiry working over 10 years ago provided valuable experience for our adaptations to the challenges of the last couple of years. Our successful migration to Koha drew immediate interest from the wider UK library community, which we were happy to satisfy as we understood our role in sharing our experience. Over the next few years we hosted around 50 visits and open days, gave presentations at a range of events from annual conferences to after dinner talks, and answered a range of queries by phone and email. I even signed a contract to jointly produce a book on open source in libraries, but disagreements with the publisher and my refusal to play down the attacks on open source by proprietary companies meant the book never materialised. This didn't stop the marketing process from kicking into action, and the book, which doesn't exist, still appears on Amazon and other booksellers with a front cover, ISBN and full description. Interestingly, they confused me with my namesake, Sir Matthew Hale, the 17th century English judge. As more libraries adopted Koha in the UK, the number of visits dropped off as people had closer libraries they were able to visit for a look at Koha in action. But we've kept up our commitment to the Koha community in the UK, frequently giving presentations at PTFS Europe events and volunteering to be early adopters of new releases, given our experience and lack of complexity in our setup, so that we can spot potential issues and give feedback for those less accustomed to the upgrade process. And I chair the Health Libraries Koha user group, joined on the organising team by Andrew Ward from PTFS Europe, Emma Gibbs from Worcester NHS and Angela Ward from Birmingham NHS, and in just over a year, amidst the rush of NHS libraries adopting Koha, our membership has risen to over 50. Meeting online 3 or 4 times a year, the focus is on Koha in a health library context, sharing information and ideas that might lead to pooling resources, and funding of development within Koha. But we've broadened topics out to incorporate issues such as sustainability and other open source products such as Aspen Discovery and a Samveri digital repository platform. So from the start, being part of the Koha community at a time of great upheaval gave us a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose and identity, and we saw it as a priority to give time back to support and encourage the growth of Koha in the UK. But the implementation of Koha gave us much more than that. The success was very much noted internally, and we began to be asked for advice by the departments. So for example, with our influence and support, Drupal was selected as the CMS for the organisational website to replace a proprietary system. And it extended beyond that to a practical level, developing products for both internal and external clients with some notable examples. We turned an Excel spreadsheet of resources collected by one of our policy team into a structured database with a web front end, which became a valuable national resource in the area of telecare. A corporate approach was adopted for graphical data representation, and rather than outsourcing, as usual, the library was tasked with the job, and used the open source HighCharts JavaScript library to represent all manner of charts required for the website over a number of years. We continued to experiment with the RSS format and implemented open source feed aggregators. Firstly, a little known and rapidly obsolete tool called Gregarious, before moving to a robust solution called Tiny RSS. We used these to accumulate masses of news items, selecting relevant items to resyndicate, whether that be health policy news, IT news, or more specific healthcare subjects. Some local scripts were developed to repackage these selections into email, RSS, or web page formats for internal and external audiences, creating an array of timely and informative products over the years. As well as income generation, this platform provided significant internal savings, as a costly subscription to a large corporate organisation providing a similar news search and selection service was cancelled in favour of our own in-house product. As with Koha, we regularly remind people that the savings we make for the organisation by using open source are not just initial but ongoing. So the launch of Koha not only gave us confidence to use open source for other key library functionality and innovation, but it raised our profile within the organisation and led to the promotion and development of further open source projects. The experience and trust we've gained has allowed us to establish a certain independence and ability to innovate. It also gives us a digital infrastructure which allows us to punch above our weight. A team of less than 8 full-time equivalent staff which, for example, hosts an image server, Cantaloupe, and our own installation of Metabase, providing some nuanced analysis not just of our use of Koha, but drawing data from our other systems such as the Inquiry Database and Google Analytics to provide detailed insights and a potential for evidence-based decisions across our full range of services. Another way in which we applied our knowledge and experience of Koha was in our digital archive project. Starting in 2014, we digitised the historic collection of King's Fund publications, around 2,000 books dating back to 1898, with each page being scanned as an individual image in TIFF format. We worked with CoSector, formerly the University of London Computer Centre, to initially implement a highly customised version of ePrints to hold the bibliographic metadata and provide the search, with the multimedia player, the Universal Viewer, embedded to display the images in a web context. All open source components of course, but the customisations became unsustainable and we were presented with a situation which was very familiar to us from our early experience with Koha. Co-Sector were beginning to support a grassroots open source archiving platform called Samvera, and specifically a front-end solution called Haiku, which seemed ideal for our use case. We relied heavily on our experience with Koha, our support for the open source model, for a new product, installed, hosted and supported by a trusted supplier. And it was that experience of Koha which gave us the confidence to make a very quick decision. And in 2018 we became the first live Haiku installation in the world. The Samvera technical platform was very different to Koha, made up of a very technical stack, with Samvera itself comprising gems written in Ruby. And the only connection between our two installations is that they share biblio numbers, allowing us to create a link on the fly in Koha search results to the full publication in the archive. We've been successful in gaining testbed funding from the National Archive to develop an ingest process, allowing the import of documents from a SharePoint environment into our Samvera-based digital archive. It is a process we know is of interest to other libraries, and that our description of the way in which we'll contribute all code back to the community and share our learning and experience with others was crucial to our successful application. Knowledge of the workings of the Koha global community allowed us to quickly understand and adopt a role in the Samvera community, which has many similarities. The Koha community is more mature and global, but issues around building a project with users and contributors all over the world are common to both. And we've tried to contribute to Samvera with attendance at meetings and publicising and demonstrating the product. When we're asked about one of our systems, we don't speak about them in isolation. To us it's an integrated approach, and if a library is prepared to adopt the benefits of open source for one system, they're often open and should be open to discussing others. And we don't make that argument without making every effort to make open source licensing our primary software selection consideration in all cases. The aesthetic limitations of this presentation are the fault of my own skills and execution, not the excellent open source components listed here, which I used to put it together. While our experience with open source and Koha has been a huge success and has provided us with an independent environment, we recognise the need for constant vigilance and protection of that freedom. As new members of staff join our organisation, they sometimes bring with them the mental baggage of stereotypes about open source and question our approach. To assist our response, we've formalised our open source strategy in a policy that relies heavily on our experience with Koha and is essentially an open source manifesto. We've also included an acknowledgement that sometimes things don't work out as anticipated. For example, we installed Spago.bi, an Italian open source business information package which Paul Palan was exploring at one point. Though we managed to finally get it running, we felt it was too complex for our needs. But we were able to make that assessment, cut our losses in terms of time commitment, learned our lessons and moved on. And when we later saw Metabase, we very quickly realised, based on our experience with Spago.bi, that it was an ideal solution for us. By acknowledging that potential for occasional failure, we feel we're adding weight to the overall process. The move to Koha and the developments of the last 15 years have been made possible with the help and backing of a resourceful and imaginative library team who've built a reputation and extended reach which belies the small staff numbers, providing innovation in many other areas such as establishing a health-related book club, online learning courses and walking tours of the local area, rich in medical history. The King's Fund Library has flourished through innovation, but the struggle to prove our value and justify the physical space we occupy is constant, and our future success will be dependent on our ongoing commitment to Koha and open source and the freedoms they provide. Thank you for your time.
Okay, I was just informed that Matt is online if anybody has any questions. So going once. Oh, Fred, come on up here.
Okay, my question is your manifesto online? And yeah, I've read a lot of papers from established companies saying open source is really creepy and it's dangerous and silly. And I would really love to hear your counter it.
Okay, we'll wait for a response.
He says that he's happy to share it. Do you want me to give him your contact information, Fred? I will make sure that he gets your contact information.
Any other questions? All right, enjoy your break.